1, 0, all engine running.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat.
Just before 9 o'clock this morning in New York, a passenger jet which had taken off from Boston slammed into the World Trade Center. Thick black smoke blotted out the Manhattan skyline.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Esoteric Roundtable. I am your host, Justin. I'm joined here with Ben, as usual, and not so usual, we are joined by our highly esteemed guest, Mr. Mark. How you doing, the Mystic Mark? Thank you for joining us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's cool to be here, and yeah, Esoteric Roundtable is a cool name for a show. So.
Hell yeah. That's kind of like what we were hoping for. You know, you have the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, which I also love, you know what I'm saying? And people kind of hear that and they feel drawn to it. You know, my family also thinks I'm crazy, stuff like that. So I was kind of hoping the Esoteric Roundtable, people would hear that and be like, all right, I want to come drop some knowledge on these guys. You know what I'm saying? I want to come have some deep talks. So I appreciate hearing that, man. Again, we kind of mentioned it a little bit before we started recording. I was just kind of pouring over. Huge inspiration for me when it comes to the podcast world, man. Just your depth of conversation, I guess. You know, I guess what got me into it kind of was the tinfoil hat. That's how I kind of started, and that led me into like things like your show and the one-on-one podcast and things like that. And it turned me from like an atheist, cynical person into like listening to the things around me and kind of just feeling the things that I felt before, but not attributing to them to like to just bullshit. I don't know. I'm fumbling over my words, but you're having me in deeper thought, man. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Ben, do you have some things to say, brother, before I fumble over anymore?
I'm really excited, man. I'm newer to this. Me and Justin started off talking conspiracy and stuff on the side. He was opening my eyes to some things, and I enjoy deep talks regardless. So this is a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun diving into different topics and looking beyond the surface of things. So I'm really excited for this episode as well.
Cool.
Hell yeah, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
So,
Good to meet you all. Thanks, Justin. I'm glad my show inspired you. That's the goal of my show, is to inspire. So
hell
I'm glad
yeah, to open some minds, bro. Absolutely. Now, there's a lot of things that you talk about that really strike with me, you know, and that's something that really opened my eyes is things like synchronicities and stuff like that. And we really want to get to that later. And Ben here is a really big fan of looking into hidden organizations and stuff like that. And he was asking me one time about Skull and Bones. And I was like, I know this guy you need to listen to, man. He's got some shit on the Skull and Bones. So I sent him to your podcast, and I'm pretty sure that's how he ended up listening to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy for the first time. So there might be some questions related to that coming up, if you're cool with that, on Ben's side.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. So I originally reached out to you, and we wanted to talk about some Mardi Gras, man. Some Mardi Gras. Me and Ben, we're from the South. Where we're from, yeah, I know people laugh when you say that. Listen, all right, we're sorry, okay? We're from the South now, but where we're from, it's near New Orleans, and there's a big Mardi Gras influence around the whole area. I'm pretty sure we even got time off school, didn't we, Ben? It would like be certain days. Yeah, you would get time off to go to the Mardi Gras. My family didn't do it too much or whatever, but people would get the chance to do it. So it was kind of a lingering topic all the way around us, and it was really exoteric, you know. It really just like, yeah, we get together and party, and that's it. That's why we do it. It's for the community, you know. But then you hear things going back, and it seems that there's more of like a hidden, almost like spooky hand type thing in there. And whenever I try to research things, I get to a place where it seems like I'm going to be finding something cool. Like we find like these things like the Pitwick Club, and it's like, ooh, what do they do? And it's like, oh yeah, they have balls. It's like, come on now, that can't be it. You know what I'm saying? These are like top of the shelf organization guys. These are CEOs and landowners and big around there. So I've like anything past the exoteric history, I guess. Is there anything that you would know about the just history and that, even of the New Orleans itself? Because I know that kind of falls hand in hand, just those two topics.
Yeah, so I mean, this all goes back to carnival, right? So you guys know what carnival is?
Like the original like source of it. Excuse me, like
Yeah, no. So I'll explain. So
Sure.
within the Catholic religion and some Orthodox groups of Christianity, other different denominations, they celebrate carnival, okay? And the reason why it's a big part of Southern culture as opposed to maybe where I live in New England where we have parades and stuff, but nothing like, New Orleans Mardi Gras or the other carnival celebrations that go on. So obviously you guys have heard of the Louisiana Purchase, right?
Yes,
So
definitely. Right.
the Louisiana Purchase, who did we purchase it from? The French. And the French and the Spanish both settled parts of the South, what's now the southern United States, in parts of Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, I mean, all along Texas, all along. And I mean, you can see it in the names and the culture, the Creole culture, the Cajun culture, right? You could see it. It's pretty obvious now.
Yeah.
So this is a holdover from that. So if you're asking about like the occult significance of it all, well, Carnival as a holiday also became a sort of vehicle for these secret societies that were around in the 19th century of America to, put their symbols in plain sight, right? Or flaunt their spiritual beliefs in a way that was, not altogether socially unacceptable.
Right.
The United States has always been a melting pot of all these different spiritual beliefs, but there are politics and different groups of people have control of the political, socio, whatever of a certain area. So if you have a certain group of people that are particularly religious in one way, you might have a group like the Freemasons, hiding in plain sight, right? This kind of idea that you're touching on with like, oh, these clubs, they seem kind of weird, like there's got to be more to it than that. And if you look at the history of the, Mardi Gras and where it started in Alabama. So I don't know where you guys.
Mobile, right? Yeah, well, we're from Mississippi, and so right in the middle there.
Yeah, right along the Gulf Coast. Of
Yeah,
Mississippi.
during Hurricane Katrina, they called us the landmass between Louisiana and Alabama. So,
So these mystic societies, that's what they're called, mystic societies,
yes,
right?
like the Mystic Cruise and
Mystic Cruise, and they have all kinds of crazy names. Some of them are like Egyptian, some of them are like weirdly sound like the Illuminati or something.
Yeah,
like that.
definitely, man. Yeah,
So-
we have a couple notes on that too. I don't want to put this whole thing on your shoulders.
Oh, yeah,
I
hit
didn't
me-
want to make
hit
it
me
sound
with
like
the-
that.
Hit me with the notes, because honestly, like as somebody who's never been to Mardi Gras, I've only read about it, like I'm probably not the expert you want on this topic,
Oh,
but
yeah, for sure.
I answered your question in the email as a yes because it's something that's come across my research desk, so to
Absolutely.
speak. I've looked into it, and I think it's really fascinating how
Heck
it
yeah.
kind of it's an example of one of the many aspects of American history that has been overlooked, right? So you at least where I was raised, there's this, and I think this sort of idea is probably stronger in the South, that America is a Christian nation, right?
Oh,
There's this
definitely.
Christian ideal as the backbone behind our entire nation. And unfortunately, you know, for the Christians in the audience, I hate to break it to you, but that's just not true. You know, if you
Right.
look at history from the beginning with the founding fathers, you have all these, you know, deists who were founding fathers among Christians of multiple different denominations. But as the colonies were settled, different denominations of Christians you know, took power in different parts, you know, like they kind of congregated together and formed governments. So that's where it gets tricky. That's where it takes on a life beyond just religion, because there's a political aspect to all of these religious groups. And there's also a new freedom provided by being in America, whereas in Europe, a lot of these groups were held under, you know, restrictions of many kinds, whether
Absolutely.
it's worship, through, you know, what you could celebrate, what you couldn't celebrate. So that's why America became this huge melting pot for all these really strange esoteric ideas, because the secret societies that were, you know, prosecuted by the church, which itself has its own secret societies, don't get me
Of
wrong.
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, let's go to America, and, you know, who knows? Maybe that's the plan from the beginning, you know, was to create America this way, or
Yeah.
maybe it's taken over.
Absolutely. And I know, thinking of things, and I know it, not necessarily, or I couldn't tell you now, people like Manly P. Hall tell you have to look at things on different levels, you know what I'm saying? And he says, I believe 7, you know, I couldn't tell you all 7 right now, but looking at the exterior Christian crust that people think that this country has, and then you just peel just a little bit back, and it's exactly what you're talking about. There's a lot of different beliefs that kind of are holding up this Christian crust, I guess is the word that I have for it right now. But 100%, man, I think you're 100% right. And these clubs and everything, and that's why it's like they're talking about, and even, you know, the Wikipedia, which is the most trusted source in anything, you know, but they're talking about these clubs, and it's like they have all these like bankers and people, you know, they call them like shady groups of people, but yeah, they just hold balls, and it's like, I feel like you're kind of just flaunting the meat in front of me, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
All right, so think about it like this, right? So you have a group of people that are in the government who have certain beliefs, and, you know, you have people who want to slowly alter the status quo. So how do they do it? They do it secretly. They do it with parties exclusivity at first. And then over time it becomes the norm. And that's where we live in now. I mean, what is carnival? It's based in this idea that goes back to the Roman Empire around, you know, Lent, and, you know, having a feast before you basically, you know, put yourself in a state of like um, aesthetic, right? Or you don't eat anything, you don't, you know, you're in Lent, and then
Right.
I believe there's a period after that where you sort of, I mean, this is something that happens in spring, but again, I'm not the expert when it comes to like the Roman and the Christian holidays, but I
Right.
do think there's something there when it comes to Mardi Gras and the way that American culture has become kind of um, less and less traditional, right? The
Yeah.
traditional values are more and more eroded over time. Maybe Carnival and Mardi Gras has something to do with that. Maybe that's a little too conspiracy
Yeah.
oriented. You're
Well,
like,
no,
oh,
I definitely
they're
see
just
what you're saying.
doing balls. Like, no, no, no. It's more than just having a ball or having a party. Like, it's about like fostering this social atmosphere of, you know, certain people are the haves, certain people are the have-nots. This is what the haves do, this is what the have-nots do. And, you know, slowly but surely, people have become less and less centered around institutions like the church, and more centered around institutions like the government. That's the,
Absolutely.
you know, that's the goal, I think, but I don't have any
Yeah.
proof on that. I mean, you ask me about like Skull and Bones, and when you talk about Mardi Gras and New Orleans, like it's an entirely different cultural melting pot than what I've been researching in New England. So you have like
For
the
sure.
French influence, you have the Spanish influence, and then you have this American Southern influence, which different groups of Europeans went into the South and in the Southern colonies during the first wave of establishing the 13 colonies. So when it comes to like New England, it seems like to me there's a certain group of people that got power in New England, in Connecticut, and Skull and Bones was kind of the result after 200 years of like, all right, now that we've established ourselves, let's funnel the power into a certain institution. So
Right.
the same thing could be happening with the groups of
Like
people,
the mystic
associated
crew
with
of
Mardi Gras.
Comus and things
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that. So
Yeah, you create a certain thing at a time period that becomes larger than yourself. I mean, Mardi Gras is a great example of that because now people, I mean, they think of Mardi Gras, they don't even know that it was started by these secret societies, right? They have an idea of it, and correctly speaking, like it wasn't started by secret societies in America. They kind of
Right.
got it going, right?
Yeah.
It goes back further than that in history, but
Yep, absolutely. It goes back to, I believe, France. Is it right, Ben? And does it go back to France? It's when the
Rome for sure. I know
Mm.
Rome practiced in it.
Nice.
So based on, I have some notes here from things I researched today. I like, granted, me and Justin grew up in southern Mississippi and Louisiana. I was born in Covington, Louisiana, which is right beside New Orleans. So my entire life was spent every year, February, January 6th through February, late February, Fat Tuesday, when they start Lent on Ash Wednesday. Every year was the same thing. They got the king cakes. They're selling those. That's a big part of things.
Yeah.
Parades are every weekend. Bourbon Street is the hot spot, but it's all parade, parade, parade. Most of them people get, really drunk at and stuff like that, act a fool. But until recently, I did not realize that Mardi Gras was organized in New Orleans by a secret society. It did exist, I know, beforehand, but it was very on and off. I know the first recorded Mardi Gras parade, I guess you would call it, was in 1699. They claimed that two French explorers landed near New Orleans, and they called the spot they landed at Point de New Orleans, or Point de Mardi Gras. I'm sorry, Point du Mardi Gras, and they had a small parade, and it kind of continued on, not really structured, not organized. And then in New Orleans, the Mystic Crew of Comus was founded in 1857. And in that same year, they organized the first real structured, organized Mardi Gras parade in New Orleans. From that time, from 1857 until 1991, they were the organizers and they put on the parades in New Orleans. Several other crews formed. In 1991, the city of New Orleans, they passed an ordinance stating that any of the crews that organized these parades or had parades or anything, they had to publicly come out and say that they did not discriminate based on race, sex, religion, things of that nature. All but I think two crews in total did that. And those two crews, the most notable would be the Mystic Crew of Comus and the Mystic Crew, or the Crew of Rex. To this day, though, they did stop hosting the parades. They don't host them any longer, but they do still hold a massive masquerade ball to close out Mardi Gras on Fat Tuesday, the night of Fat Tuesday, going into Ash Wednesday, which would be the start of Lent for the next 40 days. But in finding this, I didn't realize that Mardi Gras was all the way in Rome, and then I knew it had French roots, obviously, with the Creole culture in New Orleans.
Right.
But what I did know is that it seems like a very paganistic style of deal.
Yeah,
but
that's what
it
I've
has
been thinking, man. In the South, and I don't want to sit here and throw stones at Southern people like they're just so small-minded, all of them. But the general thought there is really quote unquote Christian traditional, and then like they'll go and party super hard at Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And they'll get the king cakes and they'll search for the baby in the king cake, and they'll wear the Mardi Gras beads and everything. And there's meaning to the things that you're doing. You know what I'm saying? And then
Yeah.
I feel like they look so deep on certain shit like Pokemon. You know, I grew up with a lot of people who couldn't play Pokemon, and then they would go to like Mardi Gras. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I guess
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. I
Well,
guess when you look overlooking it for a fun and beer, you know what I'm saying? It's different.
and when you go back to like just the Mystic Crew of Comus, the ones who organized New Orleans Mardi Gras parades, I mean, Comus was the Greek god of revelry, partying, and romance and sexual relationships. So
Yeah, I mean that's
before,
Bourbon Street to a T.
but I also did discover that in Roman, when Christianity came to Rome, this is according to the All Great Source History Channel. But when
Oh, all
Christianity
knowing.
arrived in Rome, religious leaders decided to continue the traditions of Mardi Gras, but based around the Catholic faith. So they could party, get all of their meat eating and, dairy drinking and egg eating and sexual relations out of the way before Lent started. Then they could have their Ash Wednesday. They could abstain from meat and sexual relations during Lent and then go on about their lives. So I guess it was like, the big party before you're cleansed of your
Before the
sin.
bummer time, dude.
Yeah,
Oh,
before
God's
the 40
mad at this
days of
time.
nothingness. But I mean, there's just a lot I didn't know about regarding this, and I've grown up here. So you have you have Greek mythology, you have something that's very pagan-like, and then you have Catholicism all mixed into one. It is a very weird place to
Yeah.
navigate. But as far as the social standards go, I mean, you have the Mystic Crew of Comus was the secret society that still exists in New Orleans, and they hold this masquerade ball on Fat Tuesday every year after the parades. The crew of Rex comes and meets with them, but the crew of Comus, they wear these white masks or these full face masks with holes in them to cover their faces. And I was doing some research on them, like that's kind of weird to do. Why would they wear these masks? And then one source, I think it was the New York Times, I was doing some research on that, stated that it was due to so they could mingle with other social statuses without being discriminated against. To me, that didn't really make sense because they claim to have membership fees and you have to apply for application. They don't let them in.
Well,
but
they stepped down from doing the parade specifically because they didn't want to hang out with poor black people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's literally why they didn't want to renounce their ways and let women and black people into
Yeah.
their group. So they were like, we just won't have the parades then. We'll just do the ball instead. You know what I'm saying? So they're
Yeah.
not just going to be like, all right, never mind, let them all in, you know?
Well, and since so you see that, and that's what I think is more. That seems like a more logical explanation as to why they would wear masks. I don't know. I'm not saying that's true or that's
So
what's
yeah,
happening.
you think they're just
but-
hiding their identities because
So politicians, CEOs, very high-ranking society members at this massive ball that covers their face that won't allow people of color or people of different sexual orientation or things of that nature into there. Would they want to be seen with a group that associates with that kind of ideology? That's my thought. I'm not claiming it's true. I don't know, but it seems likely. Seems like a possibility.
Yeah.
But as far as that's concerned, I mean, the crew of Comus and the crew of Rex, they're the most prominent still. They may not host the parades, but you have the Pickwick Club in New Orleans where you have to apply for membership, and there's just not a lot out there to really find real credible information other than the history behind the places. But knowing what all goes on inside of that, I have had a lot of trouble finding it. I tried to find how much they charge for membership. Could not find that anywhere. I looked and searched. I was on LSU forums.
$25 to find out how much they charge.
Yeah. Yeah. You won't hear back. We're just going to take your $25.
Yeah.
But interesting stuff. I found out a lot
Yeah, man.
Yep.
just
So,
the past few days.
oh, I'm sure.
It it's something that needs to be looked into further. But if you look at what's available right on the Wikipedia page for the Mystic Crew of Comus, it's clearly a ton of symbols that you can read into pretty easily, and not to upset anybody who's devout in their faith, but I do think that Christianity specifically certain denominations of Christianity have been used for a political purpose. The real spiritual value has been altered so that the average person lives in a sort of exoteric, devoid of meaning understanding of their reality, while the initiated few have this deeper, almost pagan Christian sort of fused version. Because again, I'm not saying the story of Christ is wrong or not factual, because I believe that that's a true story that happened. It's not just
Right.
like a myth that took
Yeah.
place in the past, but we've had such an obscured history of understanding this, layers and layers and layers of political obscuring going on. When it comes to America, by the time we get here, you already have these secret societies fully prepared to integrate, their esoteric understanding into society behind the scenes so that they can have this sort of farm situation where, some people are born into the domestic livestock pool of humanity in America. Others are born into the bloodline shepherd farmer class, right? And that's
Right.
kind of what the religion is all about, because you're raised in this certain understanding of the world, and then you're initiated into this deeper perspective that shows you, oh no, you're better than everyone else because you know the truth and they don't know the truth, right? And I'm not saying that you can't initiate yourself without being an elite. I actually think the truth is like holographically programmed into us. That's what synchronicity is about. But
Absolutely.
just like a bird doesn't take down an elk, but a panther does, but a panther doesn't fly up into a tree and sip the nectar of the flower. Like everybody has their own natural order and purpose in the sort of the way things are laid out. So not all information is for everybody, but that doesn't mean that this group should be allowed to exclusively initiate who they want into this powerful understanding. I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's exactly what's happened with this knowledge. Is supposed to have, been passed down from our ancestors. Somewhere along the line, it was passed down into the hands of certain ancestors who then filtered that information into just their descendants, while the rest of us have this sort of altered version, this skewed version, this indoctrinated version. So when you observe Carnival, you don't understand that it comes from Saturnalia. It comes from this time where the Romans would go nuts and like go crazy in the streets, and all the politicians and all the people who were in the higher stratas of class in Roman society would run around in the streets with all the people who were in the lower strata of class. So you ask, well, why would they want to have masks on? It's not about being racist. That's a part of it politically, sure, but it was about not having your identity available to anybody, so that everybody had this kind of equality at the party to and unanimity of anonymity.
Yeah.
Messing up some words there.
Yeah,
But
no, I think you got your
if
point.
everybody's on the same page of we're not going to tell on each other about what's going on today, then people are having this license to do really possibly bad stuff. And I think that's kind of where you talk about like the evils of society and why these elites are doing bad things. I think a part of their spiritual belief system is that there is no such thing as evil things. Like they think that killing a child or chopping someone's head off, or killing themselves even, is something that doesn't affect their spiritual karma. It doesn't affect them outside of this physical plane. And I think it's a sort of sickness to think that way. I'm not for that way of thinking.
Absolutely.
But I think that's a part of this degradation, because as they've skewed our understanding of the way the world works, their own understanding has also possibly been skewed, in a sort of parasitic kind of
It's
way.
like when
But
you tell a lie so much that you start to believe it yourself, you forget the original way and you start to remember it as the lie that you were telling for all those years. So,
great point. Yeah, no, exactly. It could be just like that. And it could be, maybe they just destroyed their understanding of it out of hubris or something like that, thinking that they could do better. But, regardless, I don't know the exact nature of all of this stuff. That's where the power of speculation is, and how we can use these clues of history to piece together the deeper story that's not being told to us, because there is a history that's been kept secret, and the secret societies are part of that. So someone should examine the Mardi Gras stuff. Personally, I'm not so close to the culture, so it
right.
would be very difficult for someone like me to, outside of my computer and books. But yeah, like I said before, it's come up on my desk before, and I thought, maybe we could talk a little bit about it, and then if it is something you guys want to have me back on in the future to go in depth on, I might have something written in a little
Yeah,
while.
absolutely.
Uh,
And that,
Yeah.
that is one more thing. I didn't mean to cut you off there. My
that's fine.
apologies. But that's one more thing that we did want to have you on here to talk about is when hearing you talk about some of the things that you're researching on, man, and it's like you're talking about some of these old books, and another person like this is Juan from One on One. I know you guys have a show. I fucking love your guys' show together, by the way. He starts talking, he's these old grimoires and it's just these old ass books, and I'm like, where the hell are you getting these at, man? And so me and Ben were a little new in our researching, our armchair researcher life. And is there any tips that you can give to some guys like us and just researching? Now we use like the internet. What has it been? The Internet Archive,
Internet
stuff
archives
like
and
that, the
other
Wayback
things.
Machine, and is there any other like specific websites, or would you like to keep that like off of the
No,
thing?
no,
Or
I'm not gonna hold anything back. I would just say, like, for me, used bookstores are more valuable than anything else. But you know, if you're talking about what Juan looks up, like, that's a good question for him.
yeah,
Uh,
right.
I I use search engines. If I'm
Yeah,
looking for a particular book, I'll search the name of the book plus the word PDF, and
Yeah.
it's available. It will be there.
for sure.
There are other websites that you can find that you can, like, pirate books from. So you could search that and figure out, those books. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
there's one, the rabbithole.wiki has a ton of books on it, that it's similar to Internet Archive, where you can't, sometimes with Internet Archive, you can only, like, read the book there. You
You can
can't, like, download the
borrow it
PDF.
or whatever they call it.
Similar to that, I'm sure someone more adept at programming and hacking and that kind of stuff could figure out how to grab the files off of this website. But yeah, the rabbit hole wiki
Heck
is
yeah.
a good source for weird books. But you gotta use books to get to other books. Like, if you're trying to find weird books, unfortunately, the websites that have, you know, the repositories of them are few and far between. There's this sacredtext.com. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's like an internet classic, but those are all public domain books. So you're
Right.
not going to find books that are, published within the last 80 years or so. And you might not find books from the previous generations if they are still in print. So, you know, licensings and all that kind of stuff.
Right,
But
right.
like I said, used bookstores are the best, because and especially in places where there's a community that might be interested in these topics. If
Absolutely.
you're just in the middle of nowhere and you go to, like, half price books, you might just find, like, you know, only Christian books on.
Christian love
Yeah,
novels, and yeah,
because they
that's all
yeah,
my goodwill is. I look past there. Someday I'm gonna come across like the Dead Sea Scrolls in my Goodwill
well, you gotta
library, but so far it's only like Christian love novels.
Anywhere where there's a university is
Yeah.
typically a good place to go for like used books, just because students tend to buy used books, more than,
Definitely.
so again, like politics aside, because there's a lot of really crappy, used bookstores that are politically bullshit.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But that's where I live. It might be totally different in a red state. I'm in a blue state, so there's like, we get a bunch of like.
Yeah, it's still here everywhere. Me and Ben lives.
Yeah.
He's still down south. I'm up by St. Louis currently, so I get half
St.
and half.
Louis,
but-
you would be able to find tons of stuff in St. Louis, I would imagine,
Definitely.
being such an old city. And also there's this, I think it was the St. Louis Platonists. That was a group of people in the 19th century that were interested in Platonic, the Platonic arts, the Platonic
Right.
sciences,
That's cool. I
Plato,
took
and
note
all
of
that.
that for sure.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of this, American culture is the classics, right? So there's a reason for that. The secret societies that have created our culture, they have, a secret religion that goes back to that time period with the Greeks and the Romans, and it mends with those beliefs and the pagan beliefs and other old world cultures. It's something that's above my pay grade to talk about on the podcast, but I'm very interested in it, and that's kind of one of my goals, is to learn more about that subject.
Absolutely, man. Well, we'd love to learn some more about it, since we do have a little bit more personal history with it. Maybe we can learn some more about it and invite you back on, and maybe drop some bombs on you about it, brother. So I don't want to keep you forever and ever, man. We really appreciate the time you've given us. But one thing we really wanted to talk about with you was synchronicities, man. So when I started listening, before I started listening, going down this rabbit hole of like, I don't know, just exploring the deeper self and the spiritual side and stuff like that. I lost my dad in 2021. And before that, I was like cynical, kind of an atheist kind of person, it just didn't really matter to me, stuff like that. I lost my dad 2021. 2 weeks later, I found out I was having my first child. So I have my first kid. That was all super stressful, kind of dealing with all that. And I went on antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication for a short time. And that fucked me up, man. It messed with my head bad, to the point where I just cold turkey one day. I was like, this isn't it for me. And the coming back to normal, quote unquote, from that, maybe it just knocked a screw loose completely, and that's why I'm so tinfoil hat lately. But coming back to quote unquote normal from that, I felt like I woke up in a deeper sense as well. Like maybe it flattened me out so hard that the reverberations of coming back just kind of shook something loose. But I really just, that feeling, and I almost just feel so much more like connected to a deeper side, you know what I'm saying? And listening to podcasts like yours, they've really helped me appreciate that, and to see things like synchronicities that help me link those things. Now, me and Ben have been doing this podcast for a little bit. There's been little stuff that comes up, like we did a Bohemian Grove episode not that long ago, and then the whole Ryan Garcia stuff's going on, which we thought that was pretty crazy. A lot of my research has been around Thoth, Hermes, the Emerald Tablets, stuff like that. Podcaster named Exertus kind of turned me on to that stuff, listening to him kind of talk about that stuff. I was super into it. And then it was everything we kept coming back to, even the Mardi Gras stuff. There's like the crew of Hermes and stuff like that. And I'm just like, Ben, it just always comes back to Thoth. It's always Thoth. And then one day he messages me and he's like, Cat Williams just fucking started talking about Thoth and shit on the Joe Rogan
the Joe
podcast.
Rogan experience.
And it's just a lot of stuff that we talking about. And then like, I recently just got a super urge to watch the Lord of the Ring movies, and I finished those, and I go back to work and turn on the Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, the audiobook, and he starts talking about the fucking powerful rings and stuff like that, and I had to pause it, and then we did an episode on it, and it's just so many synchronicities and stuff like that, man. And just having you on this podcast right now is alone, the fact that you would even just message us back and come on. Now, I know also that goes into how nice you are, you know what I'm saying? And again, we appreciate you coming on here. But just shit like that, you know, and I don't even know what I'm trying to get at you. I'm just kind of throwing this all at you on a platter right now. But
it sounds like you stepped into a new level of awareness, which is awesome. You know, I'm sorry to hear about the, sad parts that
yeah, right.
of that story. You know, your father passing, the blessing of having a child obviously isn't a sad thing at all.
Got two girls now. We keep stacking them up, but
well, and that's cool too. It sounds like it's a good relationship too, and with the mother and
absolutely, man. Thank you.
Kid. So, yeah, that's awesome, man. I think that, honestly, what you're saying before about like atheism, that reflects my journey in many ways too. I was pretty nihilistic about things, and certain parts of my life turned me around and got me really out of, I guess, a possible like down spiral, and now I think it's an upward spiral. There's still, peaks and valleys along the way, but that's what the synchronicities, well, that's their value, is almost like, it's easy to get caught up in them, but I think the value in them is it's almost like an indication that you're moving in the right direction, right?
Kind of like this way, like.
Yeah, and well, and you're already moving in that direction. It's not even like a signpost that you're following. It's almost like a confirmation that you took the right turn 5 minutes back, right?
Absolutely.
So like, I think that is where the synchronicities have their value. And then when it comes to like researching and asking questions, being curious, yeah, the synchronicities are going to appear. You do a podcast about Bohemian Grove, and then Ryan Garcia starts talking about it. Like, yeah, there's a sort of conscious link there that might provoke you to look further into all that, right? So absolutely. I think that's what got me interested in all this stuff in a way that became productive for my life, because there was a time in my life where I would just listen to all this stuff and it was cool, it was interesting, I'd get in cool conversations with people, but it felt like I was being judged. It felt like I was being sort of, labeled as a sort of type of person. And it wasn't until I embraced it myself and started, this podcast that I realized, oh no, there was a value in all that research, all that thinking, all that being wrong or feeling like I was wrong. Because, yeah, it's not easy, the life that we're, put in. There's all these levels of indoctrination. So when you're given that opportunity to like snap out of the programming or the indoctrination, however it hits you, some people are blessed to have not been born into those situations. But, I myself, I think most people, at least in the United States, who go to public school or, have some sort of trauma in their life, they're indoctrinated. It's unfortunate, but it's the truth. And when it comes to history, like the average person doesn't really even understand the history of themselves, let alone America. So then they go to Carnival or Mardi Gras and they throw, beads at naked women, and they get drunk and end up with their wallet stolen, lying on the concrete.
In the piss gutters.
And it's like, this is the state of the world today, but is it by design? I think so, when you know the history. But if you don't know the history, then it's easy to think like, oh, this is just how humans are. And, everybody's just operating on this like, flawed, errored kind of thing. And I don't know. I don't think God would allow us to live in a world that operated that way. And I also don't think that the evil SOBs that are running this paradigm, like, they're up against that almighty force, so they're going to be as smart as they can to keep their P's and Q's in order to keep this control paradigm going and not face God's wrath, or face it, because it does seem like some of these groups are actually trying to bring on the rapture or the apocalypse.
Yes, absolutely.
Events. So, and that's where the whole Christian, Judeo religions, they're very relevant in today's times, when people who approach conspiracy theory from maybe like a more agnostic viewpoint, where they're not from a Christian centric viewpoint. I, kind of gravitated away from the Christian centric stuff when I was younger and almost found my way back to it. I'm not quite there yet, but I think that's where the value is understanding the history, because it is relevant. I do believe in Christ, but I have trouble believing in the church. I think a lot of Christians feel that way today, but unlike many Christians, I also think like Krishna and Buddha might also be relevant, right? Which
Absolutely.
is like a spiritual, new agey kind of idea. Maybe not. Maybe that's a part of the programming too. But when it comes to Mardi Gras, like, it's reestablishing this Freemasonic, Egyptian kind of Roman, Greco-Roman link that is totally right down to the root of our federal government and the banks. And I mean, they all follow this like system that goes through, Egypt, Babylon, Sumeria, aka Sumeria, Egypt, and then Greece, and then Rome. Like, it's this like, and I think it goes back even further to Atlantis and all that. But
absolutely,
that's part of the giving us only part of the truth of what our reality really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they do it that way, how much negative karma do they gain if they're like, we're giving you the truth, we're not lying, but they're only giving us the very small bit of the truth while they're practicing the full truth, And absolutely. Ben, do you have any more questions, brother? Do you have anything that you were wanting to talk about and things like that?
I will say, so what kind of led me to the Mardi Gras topic that I lightly discussed with Justin, and then it became what this is today. It started back before we even started the podcast. I had a really big interest, and I've heard you talk about, I've heard you talk about Skull and Bones before on an episode. I went back when Justin recommended your podcast and listened to your very first episode where you're talking about the JFK assassination, and I believe that was your first episode. I hope I'm not wrong on that. But you're talking about that was where the term that the JFK's assassination is where the term conspiracy theory was coined. And I didn't know that previously. And I was like, wow, I never really thought about where did the term conspiracy theory come from? But I've always been heavily interested in these secret societies. And that's really what piques my interest is I was interested in the Freemasons. In the South, that is another big thing. There are Freemasons everywhere. There's lodges every 5 miles, every town, every sub-town. I guess you'd call it like a town that's not really a town, but they call it a town. Like I live in a small town, and then they have a town down the road called Carrier and Millard, and they each have their own lodge and everything. So how rooted the Freemasons are in the United States government from the founding of the United States has always been kind of, man, they're really high on this pedestal. There was a lot of Freemasons involved in this.
It was the first 16 presidents, if I'm not mistaken, were the first 16 presidents Freemasons or something.
There was a lot of it. A lot of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, I'm not going to say the number because I do not know it, were Freemasons. The White House, where they laid the first cornerstone, was a Freemason ritual they practiced with the wine and the corn and things of that nature. And that kind of led me into Skull and Bones. My wife is from England. Her grandfather was a naval architect in England, Germany, United States. He owned shipyards. But we talk about all kind of things worldwide when we're in Texas, which is where they live now. And he was bringing up Skull and Bones and, how presidents can be involved in secret societies like the Freemasons. And he was bringing up the fact that there were some presidents involved in Skull and Bones, and I had never heard of it beforehand. And so I got to diving into that, but quickly found that, at least from South Mississippi, it's really hard to get some credible information or some insight into Skull and Bones from what I can find. you have things like I've heard things from they're the ones who form the CIA, to they're the ones they guarantee financial, success and power when you join that fraternity, and just some that they have a Geronimo's skull in their frat house or something. I've heard a bunch of crazy things, but it's so hard from here. At least you're closer, as in New England, to where Skull and Bones would be. So it's hard for me down here, but and then it led me to different secret societies like Bohemian Grove, and then now the Mystic Crew of Comus, which is really close to me. I'm less than an hour from downtown New Orleans. So, but Skull and Bones, I know you're way closer and you know more about it. So that was one thing I wanted to talk to you a little about and get kind of pick your brain about if you had some time.
Yeah, yeah. Briefly, I could tell you guys a bit about it. I mean, obviously it's a fraternity group within Yale University, and, started in 1832, and everything you said is true. One person that you can go to for credible information about it is Anthony Sutton, and another is Chris Milligan. Anthony's not alive anymore, but I have had Chris Milligan on my podcast, and he's published a book called Fleshing Out Skull and Bones that has pretty much all the information I could tell you and more about Skull and Bones. And when it comes to the CIA, yeah, it's true that people who were in Skull and Bones founded the CIA and helped create it, right? And personally, there are synchronicities that kind of led me down this path to research all this, just because I grew up near, New Haven,
Yeah.
Connecticut, where all this stuff happened. So, yeah, I think when it comes to American history, we often underestimate these secret influences, and whether all the presidents have been Freemasons or not, I think the truth is that all presidents have been a part of some organization that they've given an oath to beyond the, oath of presidency, right? So that
Right.
should make you question what it even means to be president or presiding over the United States, right? I mean, and the senators and the Congress people and the judges, like how many of them are all in these groups that take an oath to something beyond what their oath is when they step up to their role in the American government. And again, from the foundation of the American government, we have these like sort of this implicit secret symbology that goes back to the Freemasons, but it's more than that, because the Freemasons, they're observing what's going on in human culture and finding this like spiritual value set, this knowledge that maybe they're piecing together what was lost from the old world. Maybe they know something that we don't. But when it comes to Skull and Bones, I mean, it's explicitly about power, money, politics, drug trafficking, the military. I mean, they're connected in all of that. So,
Yeah.
and you go to a school like that today, and what are they teaching kids? They're teaching them a bunch of nonsense about how history is racist and we need to destroy evil statues, because if we don't cleanse the minds of the youth about this bad history, then they'll just repeat it, and
Yeah.
that's the exact opposite of the message that, we don't remember history, then we'll be doomed to repeat it,
Doomed to
right?
repeat it. Absolutely.
So, and that's happened with Yale University's architecture. Like there was once a little kind of, they call them grotesques. It's like a thing carved into the side of a building. Gargoyle is one type of grotesque, but they had a grotesque of a pilgrim pointing a rifle at a Native American, and a Native American pulling a bow and arrow at a pilgrim, right? And then they thought, oh, somewhere in the early 1900s, they're like, oh, let's not make this Native American look like a savage. So they blocked out the bow and arrow. So then you just have a pilgrim pointing a gun at a Native American, right? So then, like in the 1990s, they're like, "Oh, look at this is a
Look at this
racist
asshole.
It's a racist. It's a racist artwork. He's pointing a gun at a Native American. What's wrong with these people?" And then they're like, "All right, well, we have to destroy the whole thing." So then then they cover the whole thing up, and it's like, all right, well, wouldn't it be more valuable if you had the original one that told the real history of how the Native Americans fought back when these people came? There's also the stories of natives working with settlers. Yeah, that happened too. That's a whole nother topic, we don't have time to get into now, but I think
Right.
Skull and Bones and the university systems that followed, Yale and Harvard, all the different universities across the country, they've helped program the American education system to have certain things left out and certain things incorporated. So that's the real truth of like, well, why are they doing these rituals like Mardi Gras over and over every year? It's to incite this kind of new world thinking so that we forget the old real value of some of these belief systems.
Right.
I don't know that the carnival is, maybe even all that valuable because, again, it's from that Roman world, but who knows? Maybe there was original.
I don't know, Mark. You better be careful saying that, all right? They take that shit pretty seriously.
You're gonna make some Cajuns mad.
Listen, I think Mardi Gras is cool. I hope to go there one day, but I hear New Orleans and Louisiana in general is a tough place to be, especially for a pothead like me. They're not very friendly to marijuana in the state of Louisiana, so I don't want to go there and get locked up.
If you're
New Orleans
partying
is
on
very
Bourbon
friendly.
Street, if you're partying on Bourbon Street, 420 friendly. If you're in
Oh,
some
yeah?
redneck town in Louisiana, I would tuck
Watch
that
out.
shit hard, you know?
Watch out. Okay.
If
All
you're
right.
in-
That's good to know.
If you're in New Orleans, you're pretty much good.
Okay, good. Well,
Alright.
yeah, I think most cities are like that nowadays, but yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I've heard horror stories from friends who've gone
Yeah,
out.
and I wish I could be like, oh, that's all propaganda. The city's
It's
great.
not.
You got to be careful in
not.
New Orleans. It
yeah.
can be a dangerous place for sure. It can be sketchy, but it's also one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, man. It is a
Historically
fantastic
rich.
place. So
Yeah.
if you
Well,
ever
and the
do get
same
the
is
chance.
true. The same is true in New Haven. And one thing that I'll say before, we wrap that topic up, it's like New Haven, New Orleans, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., all of those cities I just mentioned are all on this line that goes across the United States. And yeah, it's a ley line. It's got some history to it. And I wonder if it's something that existed a long time ago, like they knew that there's power line, whether it's a fault line or something, maybe there are ancient cities that were once built in these places, and that's why all these successful, notable cities have, become prominent along this path.
Absolutely,
But there's
man.
something to it. It's just weird. And for the most part, other than two, all of the Ivy League universities are along that line too. So it's just kind of weird
They
to
probably
me.
built those other two to throw it off. They're like, oh, damn it, Carl, you built all of them on the line, man? Like, come on.
Yeah. So there's something to that. And, doing these rituals on that line, right? Like something like Mardi Gras, maybe that's why they moved it from Mobile to, New Orleans,
That's
because
a
they're like,
very good point.
we do it over here. Because think about it. Look at the way New Orleans, where it's situated in Louisiana, and the way Louisiana is shaped. It's almost like a tuning fork, right? You have the Gulf of Mexico, this big, wide kind of like drum, and then sticking out into it is this little like fork of land, right? With the Mississippi River, one of the biggest rivers on the entire earth, flowing through this like swampy, spongy strip of land, and man comes along and builds like stone and cement and all these things on top of it, and it's like a tuning fork. So you do a ritual there every year at the same time, it's gonna have an effect.
You're blowing my mind right now, dude. I think you're hitting the nail on the head right there. That shit, we should have put that in the beginning. Hold on, let's restart. All right.
They do still hold Mardi
that's-
Gras parades in Mobile, though. They still have them all
Oh,
over
do
the
they?
Gulf
I
Coast.
didn't know that. I guess
have
they
them
do
in
have them in
Mobile.
Mississippi as
I
well. They
think
have
they even
little
have 'em in-
small, yeah.
Well,
They have them in Biloxi, Pascagoula.
Yeah, I think most big cities down south have their own local like
Yeah.
groups that throw the
Right.
party, because everybody's got the money to go to, and probably New Orleans is like, hey, go.
Oh,
we can have as
absolutely,
many
yeah.
people, we can't have everyone here. So no,
Yeah.
Mobile's where it started, but New Orleans is where it became world famous, right? That's
Right.
kind of the point there with the significance of it. But it is relevant, when you talk about Mobile, because Mobile is this wheel. It's also got this real ancient history going back to when the Welsh allegedly settled in the New World way before Columbus ever did. So there's a lot of cool stuff with Mobile too. That's initially why I found this topic, because again, like I never paid much mind to Mardi Gras because I just thought of it as like, oh, it's just a party excuse to party like every other holiday. But
Right.
then when I realized, like, oh no, there are these mystic crews and all these different like symbols, and
Yeah,
there's something deep going on there. So much
absolutely,
more
bro.
to be said. I look forward to talking to you guys again about it for sure.
Absolutely, man. And we would love to have you back on and talk about it. And I think we can go ahead and wrap it up there, man, because it felt like just talking about synchronicities, it felt like everything we tried to kept going into just kind of kept going back to the Mardi Gras. And I think that just hyped me back up, man. I'm ready to dive back into it. And I know Ben is too. We got plenty of notes here. We got some suggestions for some places for research. And I think this is better than I expected, man. I just so thankful for you to come on and have these conversations with us and just hear us rant like lunatics about some stuff and drop some knowledge bombs, man. It was just such an awesome experience. And
No lunacy at all, and I didn't participate in myself. I think it was all above board. A great conversation for sure, and good meeting you both. I enjoy it. So
yeah,
Nice meeting you,
man. Thank
absolutely.
you so much. Now, I know this may seem a little silly, but for our listeners who may not know who you are, all 33 of our current, if you would like to, drop your podcast and stuff like that.
Well, hey, don't underestimate yourself, brother, because podcasts, that once you publish it, it doesn't go anywhere. So just because you got 33 now doesn't mean you won't have 33,000 sometime in the future or
Yes,
how.
sir.
So
Absolutely.
I do appreciate the opportunity to plug. And my family thinks I'm crazy is the name of my podcast, and a true statement, if you couldn't already tell by the things that we've talked about today. And Justin says his family thinks he's crazy too. So I'm sure this audience would be right at home on my show. And if you guys want to join me, for another conversation about Mardi Gras, I would love to do that, and maybe even on my podcast so that we can, promote your show and help you guys get more ears on your show.
Absolutely, man. That would be an absolute honor for that opportunity, brother. And we appreciate you, man. And, hopefully we'll be able to talk to you soon. Everybody listening, we appreciate you. And please remember, Mystic Marcus is going to be very cringy. I'm sorry, to keep an open mind. Peace out.